When did you discover his interest in the antiques?
Well,
And did you have it prior?
no.
Or did you learn it from him?
I learned it from him. I had not much interest in it. I was brought up in East Texas, and my father was in an oil company. We moved around all the time, and it was just not something we did, look at antiques. But he was born and brought up in Baltimore, and he said we had a house full of antiques. All we had was old furniture, and he said that was all we could afford. That was his joke. So when we retired, came back here, we went to auctions, and we bought, and we had this big old house. Then, in that first year of living here, we started the paper, and we found out to our surprise, well, we shouldn't have been surprised. In Maine, we became noticed. People liked the paper and talked about the paper, and suddenly it became something they needed to read. And we found all these subscribers, you know, and it grew. Maine is not our biggest market now. Our biggest market is New York City, Philadelphia, California, you know.
Well, the magazine has definitely become one of, if not the premier antique magazine source in the country,
Well,
is it not?
At a certain level, yes. Yeah. It's not slick.
No.
But it has a lot of information in it. That was the key. We went to auctions, and he reported, because he was doing the writing then, he reported on what was sold at that auction. Well, some of the dealers were not happy about that, because they had always sort of hidden, you know, they didn't talk about it. And some of them said, well, we don't want you to do that. But they loved the information too.
Right.
And that was what Sam's idea was, put out the information.
Who was the target audience? If you're putting out the information that he says he wants to put out, who was he trying to put it out to?
It began, we thought, mainly to the small dealer. And there were small dealers up and down every highway in Maine and everywhere else. We just didn't know them anywhere else. But then we kept going, and then the auctioneers began to see that if they advertised with us, they were going to get maybe some dealers who didn't know they were around to come to their auctions.
In that first magazine that you put out, and you know, well, this is our first one, we really want it to capture some people. Do you remember maybe what the feature article Sam had written? Did he have one particular thing that, at any point did he say, if this was our only issue, I want them to remember this?
He said that, but it was not something he wrote.
What was it?
It was something that someone else wrote, a very respected dealer named Chris Huntington. He was a folk art dealer, and he knew a lot of people, had been in the trade, and we became friendly with him. We bought from him, and he wrote us an article about collecting. It was not very smoothly written, but it was fascinating. And we edited the article, and at first Sam said, we can't edit it fast enough to get it in this issue. And I said, yes, we can. So I was the editor. I taught school. I knew how to correct papers. And I worked on it, and Sam said, we have to get it. If we don't put this in the first issue, we won't have a second issue. And we put it out there, and people were fascinated by it. Because he talked about, this is how you buy and sell antiques. That's what Chris talked about. I'm not afraid for people to know that I buy, and then I jack up the price, and I sell it for something to somebody who can afford it. If I can buy it at a good price, I know I can sell it.
Right.
And I know where to offer it.
Because it may not be to a retail customer.
That's right. It may be to another dealer.
Right, who in turn is going to, well, he's going to pay a little bit, he's going to pay whatever,
more,
he's going to pay more.
And pass it on.
But he has a client or another dealer in mind.
That's the way it works. The whole business works that way.
Now well, I shouldn't even just say good pieces, but pieces generally could have a rather long turnover rate before it ends up in somebody's house.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It can, and it still exactly works the way you say. You were brought up in that industry. That's exactly the way it works.
And when those pieces finally end up in somebody's house, and that estate is now going to be transferred either through an auction or an estate sale or whatever, that piece is going to start its journey
again,
all over again.
Exactly. See, it's a fascinating business. You can't help but be interested in it. If you're interested at all in any of the pieces, you know, if you have things you like and enjoy, you can just see them going, and they keep going. The sales in New York City, of course, we follow all those.
Right.
Huge amounts of money paid for pieces, and they start off, you can track some of them.
Right.
And that sort of interest in where it came from, and very often in our stories you can read, this sold here for $100,000, and last year in the May sale at such and such an auction house, it sold for half that amount.
And what's really interesting about that is not only is there history to the piece being made, you know, you're going to have where it was made regionally and who the cabinet maker was, and maybe a carver additionally to that. So we have that history of the construction of the piece. And then once it starts at one family, its provenance begins. And it just lengthens and over time. And if it has a notable owner,
that adds to the value immeasurably.
Right. But it also takes history with it.
Yes, it does.
It's been born of its own history. And then that's what I find interesting about antiques, is that it takes us through history with it.
Yes.
And it's fascinating.
And you can investigate and find, and that's the fun of the research, you know.
Yeah.
Where can I find where this came from and who made it?
Now, I remember in one of your issues that you guys were at the auction when the pie crust tea table was the first piece to reach $1 million at an auction.
I think, yeah, our writer was there.
Right.
We were not physically
not
there.
physically,
Yeah.
right. And then just recently, within the last 5 years, I think, that same table went for almost $2.4 million, I think. And
the prices that these excellent, wonderful pieces are going, and they know who made them, and they know where they came from. Their prices are unbelievable.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that the economy is, you know, tanking somewhere. There is money to buy those things. The prices are just incredible. And that's, you know, we publish those prices. That's what that's part of our most interesting thing, is the coverage of New York and Philadelphia and all those big, and people from California and what they buy out there. It's fascinating. It's the most interesting business, I think.
There are certain things that it's only sell to millionaires, and then there's the rest of us, right? Would you say the market of the rest of us has grown, and would you say the market of the millionaires has grown or stayed the same?
Well, I think the market of the millionaires has grown because there's so much money up there. The market of the ordinary person has changed. I said, you know, somewhere in there, that when we started, there were all these antique shops up and down all the roads in Maine. They're not there anymore. They're in group shops more than they were, you know, Aunt Molly's little antique shop. And the internet has really changed the business, because almost everybody, all those little dealers, are now selling partly on the net, on the web.
Do you think they do that because it's a way of keeping their overhead down versus...
I'm sure it is, but also it's a way of reaching the audience that's worldwide.
Sure.
Because they are selling things now to people who are in Europe, because they can put something up there and everybody can see it.